Hey, what's up, guys? So, as I drink my morning coffee, I am getting ready to go to the gym, maybe do some bag work, some shadow boxing, some stretching today, and then head over to the house, and that's pretty much my life these days. So that's what's up. But before I get started with that, I wanted to get to your questions. Ask me anything. For April 2019, I posted a video last weekend, and I got all of your questions right here. Now, I got a ton of questions. I'm getting more and more questions for each one of these that I do. So, some of you guys asked multiple questions. I had to narrow them down to maybe one question per person. So I apologize if I couldn't get to all of your questions and everything, but within reason, guys, I have to scale it down a little bit. And then if you have any more, bring them over to the Neutral Corner. We do it live every Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern. Come here to the channel. You can get your questions in then, okay? So let's get started, man. We got a bunch of them here. John Newman asks, what was my MOS in the Marine Corps? For those of you who don't know what that means, basically what your job is, what you do every day when you're out in the fleet. I was a ground radio repairman. So I don't know if they still have technically a ground radio repairman or if it's just like a communications repairman now. But back when I was in, that's what they called it, ground radio repairman. And then you also ask, how many career PBC fighters have made it to the Hall of Fame? And he says specifically fighters whose first career advisor was Heyman. In other words, fighters that Heyman brought up from, cradle to the grave, so to speak, right? I can't think of one. The guys that end up signing with Heyman usually are guys that are built up, the really good fighters, guys that are built up by Top Rank and those types of platforms, mostly Top Rank. You think of guys like De La Hoya and Mayweather, they were all built up by Top Rank, and then they kind of went their own way. And of course, Floyd went over to Heyman and became Heyman's biggest brand fighter. But I can't think of one that Heyman represented from the time he was a prospect all the way to the time he became a champion. I just can't think of one. Guys, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but to me, zero. Melvin Perez asked, have I ever tried a pupusa? Yes. So when I lived in Los Angeles, before I lived in Koreatown, I lived in a neighborhood right by Koreatown, which is called Westlake. And it was a heavy Salvadorian population and Nicaraguan population. And, part of that neighborhood's legacy is it is the birthplace of MS-13 here in America, one of the biggest gangs that we have here in America. It was a prison gang down there that moved up here. Anyway, there was a movie loosely based on it with Ethan Hawke and Denzel Washington, Training Day, loosely based on that neighborhood. That's where I lived. I lived right there. And yeah, there was pupusas everywhere. And actually, I dated a girl from El Salvador, and she'd make them for me and everything else. So yeah, man, I've had a bunch of pupusas. They are very, very good. ASIC A-Man asks, do big companies like ESPN, etc., fear to hire people like myself who are seeking the truth? And he mentions the back and forth I had with Bob Bennett after that first Canelo Golovkin fight and that horrible Adelaide Byrd scorecard. Seemingly to a certain extent, you kind of have to play the role when you have a corporate job like that. You can't have too much of an opinion one way or the other. You can have an opinion, but you can't go to an extreme with it. You have to kind of keep it mainline when you have that sort of position. So yeah, to a certain degree, I do think that they're wary. Now, if I ever had an opportunity to get a job at ESPN or something like that, part of my negotiation with them would be, look, you're going to have to let me speak my mind. And I know other folks who have done that and had that conversation before they were hired with ESPN. And I would just, I'd let them know, hey, I will tone it down, I'll pull it back, but you're going to have to let me be me. That'd be part of the negotiation. And, who knows? Now, is my platform big enough yet to work at ESPN? No. I think I'm ready. I think I could do it. I think I'd crush it if I got an opportunity like that right now. But that's years away. And that's, part of doing my show and doing all the work I do with Boxing Monthly Mag, Ring Mag, everything else, is building up my profile so that one day in the future, maybe a position like that can open up for me. I hope so. Edgar Valdez asks, I use any resources to help teach me how to do some of the work around my house. You guys know I'm doing renovations on my home. Also, does it matter if I follow any code regulations? So code regulations, there's some basic general kind of universal codes that I do follow, but any local stuff like that, I really haven't been checking. Hopefully that doesn't come and bite me in the ass. But any major construction that I've done in the home, like I had some beams put in, some ceiling support beams, some joists and everything like that, I did work with a contractor friend who did that kind of stuff, because I just don't have the equipment or the manpower, the tools to do that. Everything else I did is pretty general and basic. So, you know, maybe more complex than what most people do, but it's not to the point where I have to really pay attention to a code. As far as where I learned it from, is my dad. My dad can basically build a house with his bare hands. The guys, you know, I come from a blue collar, working class kind of family, and most people in the Detroit area in Michigan and the Rust Belt, that's kind of what they do for work. You know, they work with their hands, and that's what I grew up around. So I grew up around people always fixing cars, building stuff at houses. You know, I didn't know there was such a thing as movers, like professional movers who would move people from house to house or whatever. Because all I ever knew was people moving their own shit, you know, and family members would come over and help you move. And if you didn't have a truck, you'd use 5 cars, and you'd just load stuff in, you know, family members' cars and take it to the next apartment or whatever. That's what I grew up around. I didn't even know there were movers, right? So like that gives you an idea of kind of the environment I grew up in. And that's kind of how I learned. And then the rest of it, you know, yeah, I've watched some YouTube videos, and then a lot of it, though, is just trial and error, man. Just trying stuff and messing up a bunch of times and having to fix your mess up, but learning about it. Let's see. Jacinto Martinez asks, any interest in Avengers Endgame? I have no idea what that is. I'm guessing that's a video game. I never heard of it, man. David Banner asks, do you think the Santa Cruz Russell Jr. fight eventually happens within the next 12 months? I've talked about this. I told you guys that when I was in Dallas for Spence Garcia, I bumped into Santa Cruz and one of his sons. They were actually in the bathroom down in the bowels of AT&T Stadium, and I asked him point blank, and he said he wants to fight. He said Russell's team doesn't want to fight. That's what he told me. There was no microphones or lights around. That was off the record. He told me that just as, you know, man to man. I tend to take him at his word. I would think that at some point that fight has to happen. Maybe in 12 months, maybe do I think it happens this year? No, but maybe early next year. I think it is possible, but I just don't know. Gary Russell Jr., I don't know what him and his team want to do, man. Roman Caminero asks, favorite sport other than boxing, and where do I rank Triple G all time? So favorite sport other than boxing, growing up I loved basketball. I ate, drank, and slept basketball. And during the time of the Bad Boys, that's when the Detroit Pistons were really, really good. I loved basketball more than boxing briefly. There was a brief, you know, a few years there where I was just basketball crazy. I knew every statistic of every player, and I played basketball a lot. And I was actually really, really good. I had a couple of colleges willing to give me partial scholarships and stuff, but my dumbass didn't want to go to college, and I went to the Marine Corps. I should have went to college. It would have made my adult life a lot easier, my 20s anyway. But basketball got boring to me, and the NBA lost me years ago. I know I'm going to get hell for this, but Michael Jordan kind of started to ruin the NBA. And then when the next generation of guys came in after him, Kobe Bryant and especially LeBron James, they just ruined the NBA because the NBA changed their rules around a handful of players to make those players more powerful, and the game cater to just a few studs. And it just lost its appeal of what it used to be to me. You know, I like, again, blue-collar, tough guy sports. In basketball in the 80s, the NBA was that. Those guys were badasses, man. There'd be fights. You know, you could actually get physical. And now it's just a pussy league. The NBA is just a bunch of whining, bitchy little woke pussies. And just spoiled, entitled brats. I can't watch it. So now my favorite sport other than boxing is American football. And the NFL is kind of becoming what the NBA became. They better clean their shit up pretty quick. It's becoming the no fun league. But I do enjoy American football. There are some parallels to boxing in it. Let's see. Oh, and he also asked, where do I rank Triple G all time? Guys, it's too soon to rank Triple G all time. He's still fighting. I don't believe in ranking active fighters all time because their story isn't told yet. Let's see what Triple G can do. I think he's going to fight Canelo a third time. I favor Canelo in that fight just because of youth and age and all that. I think he's going to move up to 168. Can he get something done at 168? If so, then, you know, that improves his legacy. We got to see. So give it time. DS Kendall's 210 asked, do any of those Twitter tough guys approach you? Did any of them approach me while I was covering the Spence Garcia fight? And are any large MOB t-shirts available? The first question, no. Of course not. And I know some of them are there. I know one specifically that really just went beyond the level of doucheness on Twitter, going after me and trying to report me. Of course not letting me know about any of it. Knowing full well that what he was doing was twisting my words and everything else. And I know he was there. In fact, I saw the back of his head walking down the hall at one point after the weigh-in Friday before that fight. And I know he saw me because he had to have walked right by me. And I was actually doing a video while he walked by. He knew I was there, and he specifically stayed way the hell away from me. I did not see him for the rest of the event. And large MOB tees, we have 4 left. We've sold a bunch of t-shirts the last 2 weeks. I just shipped one to Canada, a couple to Australia a couple days ago, several throughout the United States. So we're getting rid of the stock that we have. We only have 4 larges left, my man. So if you want to get one, email me, monteroonboxing@gmail.com, and we could do it through PayPal. Devin Cruz asked, do I have any favorite political commentators, YouTubers? Yeah, I like Joe Rogan, Dave Rubin, Tim Pool. Tim Pool is excellent, very, very researched, and does a good job exposing the laughingstock that has become the mainstream media in this country. Reason TV is good. Big Think is good. I like TJ Kirk. He's a guy that's been on YouTube forever. A little crazy. I don't agree with some of the things he says. I don't agree with 100% of anything any of the guys I mentioned say, but he's kind of out there with some of his viewpoints, but he does make some good points about particular subject matter. So I enjoy those guys and a bunch of others. Brian Wells asked, does Teofimo Lopez have a chance against Loma? And how do you feel about Wilder getting back to the basics? So, as I mentioned on TNC this week, I'm starting to think that Lopez-Lomachenko fight doesn't happen. I don't see, number one, I don't think Lopez is ready. I think Lomachenko would absolutely embarrass him right now. He's just not ready yet. He's ready to contend for a title against a top-level fighter. But guys like Lomachenko, Spence, Canelo, Golovkin, Usyk, Crawford, they're on another level. Those guys are elite. They're better than A-list fighters. They're like elite, right? Lopez needs to fight a top A-level guy first to be ready for Loma. And I just don't think he's going to be able to make 135 for that much longer. I see him eventually fighting Jose Carlos Ramirez, somebody like that. And I'd actually rather see that. Lomachenko, I'd rather see fight a guy more his age. So, yeah. But right now, if they fought, I'd favor Lomachenko by decision, pretty wide. Wilder getting back to basics against Dominic Breazeale, let's see what happens. I know in an interview recently he said he's going to get back to basics. We'll see. I'll believe it when I see it. John Yun asked, can you give us your prediction on how long we'll have to wait, or when you think other big fights will eventually occur like you did with the Wilder-Joshua situation? Fights like Spence Crawford, Loma Garcia, Inoue Rungvisai, Joshua Usyk. Okay, Spence Crawford, I've talked about this a lot recently. I don't think that fight happens till 2021 at the earliest. Lomachenko Garcia, I'm starting to think that fight never happens. I don't think Garcia is going to move back to 135. I think he should. I think it's ill-advised of him to go to 140, but there are PBC guys there he can fight, and that's his whole point, is to fight once, maybe twice a year, and make the most money for the lowest risk. If he fights Lomachenko, he's going to demand Loma move up to 140. I don't know if Lomachenko wants to do that. It would depend on money. And then, of course, Top Rank and Bob Arum, they're going to want that on ESPN. Grandpa Bob is really stubborn about things like that. and Mikey Garcia is going to want it over on Fox or Showtime. So I just don't know if that fight's going to happen, dude. If put a gun in my head and you asked me to bet on it, yay or nay, I don't think it happens now. And I think it's more on Garcia. Inoue and Rungvisai. For that to happen, you got to wait until the World Boxing Super Series is done, which obviously is going to be this year. But I think that fight's very possible for 2020. I think those are two guys who would be willing to do that fight. And I think Rungvisai would be willing to travel to Japan to do it, where it would be very, very lucrative for him. So I expect that kind of, if Inoue wins the tournament, it's not a given, but if he does, Rungvisai would have to move up and weight. But he also has to win his rematch with Estrada. So assuming those things happen, a fight between him and Inoue would be very lucrative. I do think it'd be possible. But let's see how he looks against Estrada. Let's see if Inoue can win that tournament. If those things happen and there's a good enough offer for Rungvisai to not only fight in Japan, which is where Inoue would want it, but move up in weight. If all those things could happen, sure. I think that it's very possible. Joshua Usyk. Don't shoot the messenger, guys, but we might see Joshua Usyk before we see Joshua Wilder. That's the truth. But we got to see how Usyk looks against Carlos Takam and, maybe one more guy before he goes to somebody like Joshua. October 4th, ask, if you could interview any retired boxer, who would it be and what would you want to ask them? So Tony Canzoneri, who I think is one of the more underappreciated, underrated fighters in boxing history by most fans, by most casual fans, and even a lot of young media guys. One of the best fighters pound for pound ever. And I just think he's criminally underrated when you look at what he accomplished. Championships, I believe, in 5 divisions. And guys, this is back in the 30s, 40s. That's when he did the bulk of his work. That's before we had 8,000 different sanctioning bodies. That's before all the junior and super divisions. That was an accomplishment. People talk about Henry Armstrong and what he did, and they should. What he did was amazing. But Tony Canzoneri did it before Armstrong. So he should be on the same level, and for some reason he's not. But if I could talk to him, one of the things, he was an Italian-American born in the South, and I'd want to talk to him about, during that time when Italians were fighting a lot of racism and prejudice, particularly in the South, the Italians that were down there, even though New Orleans area where he grew up, there was a good portion of Italians, but the biggest public lynching in American history, you'd think that would involve African Americans. It was actually Italian Americans. The biggest public lynching in American history was when a bunch of people in New Orleans rounded up over a dozen Italians and hung them in the public square. It was awful. It was a horrible event. And there were things going on down there that really are just not talked about in history classes and history books here in the United States. I'd want to talk to Tony about some of that stuff if he'd open up about it. Also, October 4th asks, assuming Joshua versus Wilder happens in 2020, how do you see the actual fight playing out? I don't know if it happens in 2020. I'm starting to really have my doubts. If it does happen, I think at that time, it really depends on what happens, how well things are going at the zone, and then the money situation. There might be more money in it for AJ and his team to come over to the USA and fight in Las Vegas against Wilder. And Wilder might be in a better position at that point if his ratings against Brazil do well. He already had a decent pay-per-view revenue with Fury. So, it's kind of too soon to tell where it'll happen. But if it happens in Vegas, that gives Wilder a big advantage, with the judges and the establishment and everything here. But I still, just based upon fundamentals and everything I've seen, man, I still favor AJ by decision in that fight. Let's see. Johnny Boy asks, best mob movie of all time. A lot of people want to go to The Godfather, and The Godfather was an excellent film. But the best, most accurate portrayal of the probably 3rd generation of the mob was Goodfellas. Maybe 4th generation by that point in this country. Just the dysfunction of the mob in the power. People think that the mob was powerful back in the 20s and 30s, and it was. But in the 70s, the mafia ran New York City. It built half of the city, half of Manhattan. I mean, really, really did, man. There are buildings on Wall Street that have glass and steel in them that was controlled by the mob. Seriously, so powerful in the 70s. But it began to get dysfunctional in the late 70s into the early 80s. And that's when things really started to change. And that movie just does a great job portraying some of that. Brendan from Champaign asked, why don't they start building a Mikey Garcia, Gervonta Davis fight? Everyone talks about Loma Mikey, Loma Tank, but why no Mikey Tank? Dude, that's a great question. That's a great question. And the only thing I could say is there's agenda behind that. There are a lot of people who are fans. You guys know how it is now. There's people who are fans of platforms and promoters more so than the fighters themselves. And yeah, Gervonta Davis, he's technically a PBC guy, I guess. He's promoted by Mayweather, who's associated with the PBC, so there's some gray area there. But a Tank Garcia fight, particularly when Mikey was at 35, that was an in-house fight, easy to make. Why wouldn't people talk about that? Why would they want to see Tank go fight Loma? I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Now, look, Tank is going to be at 135 soon, but like I said, I don't think Garcia is going to be able to get down to 35. He probably could if he really wanted to. He's not going to want to sacrifice that much, though. He wants it pretty easy. That's what Mikey Garcia does, So, I would like to see Loma versus Tank because that's one of the better fights at 35 that can be made. But I'd love to see, actually, Tank versus Teofimo Lopez. There's another fight that I think, just based upon styles, would be outstanding that nobody talks about. It's all politics, bro. Jose Montano asks, being you rehabbed the house yourself, what was the initial reason you bought the crib? Was it to rent it out or eventually flip it? How did you learn to do it all yourself? And do you plan on showing the rehab after you're finished? So the reason why we bought this house was to live in it. We're going to live in this house. But hopefully we'll be in a good enough position where 5 years from now, 7, 8 years from now, if we want to move out and get a different house in a different neighborhood or some job opportunity opens up, let's say ESPN comes calling my name or something like that 5 years from now and we have to relocate. I want to be in a position where I can keep this house and rent it out. And yeah, so I talked about learning how to rehab and everything like that earlier in the video. And as far as showing it when it's done, hell yeah. I'm going to be doing lots of videos from the house. I'm going to be doing a lot more videos on the channel once I get all that stuff done. There's a lot that I want to do. I have so many ideas. And, definitely part of that will be just showing you guys the crib, man. So that's on the agenda. Andrew Ogilvy asks, is there a chance Canelo could blow Jacobs out of the water, or is it destined to be a close fight? Based upon styles and mentalities, I think it's going to be a close fight. I actually think it's going to be a very, very close fight. And I'm excited for it, man. Both Boxing Monthly Mag this month and Ring Mag. I don't have the Ring Mag in here. It's in the other room. But they both have that fight on their cover. So everyone's looking forward to that one. Captain Hook Chronicles from Canada asks, who do you think is stronger than sleeping pills with a microphone? Lennox Lewis or Sugar Ray Leonard? Ouch! Yeah. Lennox is just a very calm person. He's just, when you meet him, he's very chill. And what's amazing is how somebody with that kind of mentality could be such a killer in the ring when he was on. But, I love Ray Leonard. One of my favorite people, one of my favorite athletes, but he is just not good at commentary. I'd have to give that one to him. Fleener asks, ever been to Canada? Would you come here for a fight? Why do you think there aren't many great Canadian fighters today? So yeah, I grew up in Detroit, so of course I've been to Canada. I went to Windsor a lot. We could drink there at 19. I've been to Toronto, some of those small towns around there like Sarnia and stuff like that are right in that area. Haven't been to Montreal, haven't been to Vancouver, any of those places. I'd love to check them out. My brother Anthony's been to Vancouver. My sister Jennifer has been to Montreal. So between us, we've kind of seen all there is in Canada. But I'd love to go up there for a fight, man. Especially Montreal. That's where the best fight scene in Canada is. So I'd love to get up there. As far as why there aren't many great Canadian fighters right now, there are some good quality Canadian fighters, but great, I don't know, man. I think that if you want to be a good fighter in North America right now, whether it's Mexico, United States, Canada, you have to go to where the great gyms are. The best gym scene is in Los Angeles. You guys know I talk about that all the time. The second best gym scene right now is probably the hottest up-and-coming scene is Texas, man. Dallas, Houston, in that area. So you guys need a really good Canadian prospect to be willing to do what guys like, so many guys, I mean, so many fighters from around the world, right? Irislandi Lara went to Houston. Regis Prograis went to Houston. A bunch of the Eastern European fighters are going to Los Angeles and relocating there. You need a Canadian guy to do that instead of staying up in Montreal and sparring and training there, where there's a good, healthy scene. Don't get me wrong. It's on par with New York. It's a good, healthy scene. But if you want that elite, the hot level training where the up-and-coming guys are, where you could just be in that environment, got to come to LA or maybe even to Texas. Got to do it. And until there's Canadian prospects who are willing to start doing that, and it can't just be one dude, it has to be a movement. Look at what Igis Klimas is doing with the Eastern European fighters, right? He's got like a dozen or so, maybe more than that, guys now training out of Oxnard who are all from Eastern European countries. So it's a community, right? Sparring and training in the gym scene, it's best when it really is a community. It's not just one guy doing it his way or whatever. So when you get a handful of Canadian guys that, let's say, relocate and start training in LA full-time or something, then you might see something happen. Of course, they go back and fight in Canada, but they get that training and that sparring there in LA or a place like that. I think then you'll see a change. Carlos Espino asks, who do you think should be the fighter of the decade? Assuming you're talking about 2010 to 2019, bro, that is wide open. It could be, there's really no one runaway favorite. I mean, I just wrote some notes here. Canelo, depending on what he does this year, he might be the favorite. I mean, honestly, if you look at, I'm not saying I agree with the decisions, all of the decisions that went his way, but if you go with the decisions that went his way, with the actual record, he's a candidate. Of course, Golovkin, if you believe that he should have got the decisions over Canelo and what he's done, he's a candidate. Terrence Crawford, he's up there. Alexander Usyk, depending on what he can do at heavyweight this year. Vasily Lomachenko, of course. Andre Ward. Look, I don't feel he beat Kovalev in that first fight, but technically speaking, he got the decision. So if you respect the judge's decisions, quote unquote, he's a candidate. Anthony Joshua is a candidate. So there's a bunch of guys like right there, but there's no clear favorite, dude. That's going to be a tough one because most of the time there's a runaway favorite. Knight of the Tiles asks, best heavyweight fight you've seen, and he says it's Foreman Lyle for him. Most entertaining fighter, it's Gotti for me. Dude, just off the top of my head, Foreman Lyle, yeah, that might be the best. I can't pick one. If we're talking recent times, I'm talking championship level fights, elite level fights. I still think Joshua Klitschko was an outstanding fight that's going to age very, very well. Gotti, of course, my favorite fighter of all time. The most consistently exciting, yet still fairly high-level fighter. There's been exciting guys who are B-level, C-level kind of guys. Gotti won titles, you know what I'm saying? And he actually did beat some good fighters. He was, right on the cusp. I'm not going to say he wasn't an elite fighter or anything like that, obviously. But at his best, he was an A-level, top-level fighter and consistently entertaining. There's never been anyone like him, at least not in the last 40, 50 years. So, yeah. Fricky92 asks, what are your thoughts on Maxim Dadashev? One of the top prospects in boxing, 13-0, 11 knockouts, 140-pounder. There's a lot of talent in and around that weight class right now, man. A lot. It is an embarrassment of riches. He's ready for a top 10 fighter. He's ready. I kind of put him in the same box as Teofimo Lopez, where they're ready, not ready for the elite, but they're ready for a top 10 guy. And then he asks, am I subscribed to PewDiePie, who is a popular YouTube guy? No, I'm not. I don't watch his stuff. Hawker Mustang asks, how long have I worked in construction? Who is more of a cherry picker, Andre or Charlo? Okay, so I don't work in construction now, but actually when I was 18, I briefly worked in concrete. So I actually did work in concrete for about a year. My dad knew a guy named Pete Scavone, who was a foreman on a concrete crew. How mobbed up does that shit sound? He owed my dad a favor. My dad asked him, hey, can you get my boy a job? He'll do whatever the hell you want. And so I went there and worked in concrete at 18. And I was basically the bitch boy, the errand boy. I did all the nasty, grimy, shitty work on that crew. Man, I learned a lot. Tough work, man. As far as Andre and Charlo, are they cherry pickers? I don't know. I think it's more or less they are, they're entitled. They have a sense of entitlement. And they're playing the wait game. Hurry up and wait. Sit back and wait for the big fights to come to them. And that's more on their management than anything else. I would say Andre is even more delusional than Charlo, though. Charlo's actually have somewhat of a following. David Hind asked, do you think Dillian Whyte should wait for the Wilder mandatory and fight more in the States, or go for the mandatory fight with AJ next year, Michael? You know, what does Whyte want? Does he want the more winnable fight or more money? I think that he's got a real shot at Deontay Wilder. I think that AJ has already seen him, and AJ's improved. Whyte has improved as well, but AJ's improved, and a lot of people are disrespecting AJ and don't see him as good as he is. I think AJ would beat him again fairly decisively if they do a rematch, and the fans over there just don't want it, right? AJ, after his last fight, he asked the crowd, you know, he grabbed the mic in the ring and he asked the crowd, do you want to see me fight Dillian Whyte again? And the crowd booed. No one wants to see it. If I were him, I'd go after Wilder. Fight here in the States, do it in Vegas or something, make the most money you can. And if he lands clean on Wilder, he's got a real chance, man. Troy Williams asked, does Georgia serve Mexican food or have any taco trucks? Yes. I don't know about Georgia, but here in Atlanta, there's actually a lot of Mexicans. And there are some suburbs of Atlanta that have massive Mexican populations. And that is the sign, you know, that's always a sign that you live in a real city, right? A real actual city, which Atlanta certainly is. And there are suburbs of Atlanta that are very Korean. It has the second largest Korean population outside of the Los Angeles area in America. I didn't know that. But yeah, there are a lot of Mexicans here, which I didn't expect. I didn't know. Yeah, you wouldn't think that with Georgia. But yeah, there's a significant Mexican population here and some good Mexican food, man. We found some good Mexican places, Tiff and I. Timmy Turner asked, any news on Ivan Baranchek? So the IBF is threatening to strip him. And because they're threatening to strip him, I think it's very likely he gets back in the tournament, which he should. That's what he needs to do. You know, he needs to honor that commitment. And then he asked, when do you think TNC, or when will I do TNC with my brother Anthony again? Whenever my brother Anthony gets his ass out here to Atlanta and quits fucking around and gets out here and wants to do an episode, I'm down, because we always have fun. But he's out there in Long Beach right now chilling. He's got to get out here, man. Ko Matsuda asked, why do you think world champs now aren't younger than the champs 30 years ago? Yeah, maybe there were some younger champs. I assume that you're referring to a lot of these Eastern European guys that come over and win titles, and a lot of times they're in their late 20s, early 30s. And maybe before you'd see guys who are in their early, mid-20s winning titles. Now you're seeing some older guys. The answer is simple. A lot of those fighters go professional later in life. So in yesteryear, in years past, when boxing was dominated by Americans, a lot of guys would go pro at 18. You see that still with a lot of the Mexican fighters. But these guys that over from Eastern Europe, which are now starting to really dominate in the sport, a lot of these guys don't go pro until their mid, sometimes late 20s, man. So they're just older in age before they're even professional, before they can challenge for a title. I think that's why. The Fight Scout asked, do you take pictures? Did I take pictures of the house before remodeling? It looks like you redid everything, which is a hell of a lot of work. Dude, I've probably done 90% of the work in there. There's certain things like electrical work that I couldn't do because you have to have an electrician technically do that, so it's within code, stuff like that, and plumbing. But everything else I have done. And yeah, it's a hell of a lot of work. And of course, we took pictures of the place and some video before. So eventually, we will get around to doing a before and after video and stuff, and I'll try to post it here on the site. Ed Caller asks, what drinks do I want to put behind the bar? Oh, yeah. Everything. I'm eventually going to build shelves and mirrors and have a whole cool area set up, and you guys will see all that eventually. It's not going to happen right when we move in because I'm broke right now. But as I start getting some more money in the coming months and stuff, I will complete all of that. There will be a little mini fridge for beer and stuff, but I just want to kind of build up a shelf of cool. Of course, I'll have my standard liquors and stuff, but I want to have some cool, rare stuff up there eventually. It's going to be awesome, man. Jan CZES 10 asks, I believe you did talk about this, so maybe you can link the video. But if not, do you remember why AJ refused the $50 million offer from Wilder? Was it legit? Could it be considered ducking, especially now when Wilder refused $100 million? So, all the back and forth about Wilder supposedly offered $50 million, and then Hearn and AJ supposedly offered however many $1 million. Guys, all of that's just bullshit. It's the same process that we saw between Mayweather and Pacquiao for years, where Mayweather offered a flat fee to Pacquiao, which was absolute bullshit. It was posturing. It was a gesture. He knew Pacquiao wouldn't take it. It wasn't even a formal offer. It's not like there was a massive... These contracts, guys, they're this thick, right? It's not like a contract was sent over and lawyers were looking. It wasn't anything like that. It was just fluff. It was to get people on the internet talking, and it was so that Floyd's fans could feel like they were making an offer and trying to make the fight. And then Arum and Pacquiao's side, they do stuff like that too so that their fans would be appeased. And then we saw the same thing with Canelo and Golovkin for a while. More so, obviously, on Canelo's side because he was the A side. Where they, there was a flat fee offer to Golovkin. All that was complete bullshit. All this stuff back and forth between AJ and Wilder was horseshit. There's no merit to it. There's a kernel of truth to some of it, okay? A kernel of truth. But most of it was just bullshit. What we do know for sure, we do know this for sure, is that Wilder was offered a substantial offer from DAZN that, regardless of how you whack up the numbers, equaled $100 million more, right? So which is what, 8 figures? I got this wrong before. Is that 8 figures? So whatever it is, you're talking $100 million, right? And we know he declined that. We don't know the reasons why. And we'll see, maybe in time it'll look like a very wise decision. Maybe in time it'll look like a horrible decision. But we do know that much. That was an action. There were meetings. There were people flying from different parts of the world into offices discussing massive contracts as thick as this, right? That did take place, and he turned that down. Take from that what you will. I don't think either guy is ducking each other. I think they're both avoiding each other. And by the way, Tyson Fury should be included in that mix. They're all avoiding each other and trying to make the most money they can before they eventually fight each other. That's what they're all doing. They're all being businessmen right now. Macy Kosicki asks, why did the Contender show suck? And he talks about some of the production and stuff like that. Look, the Contender, especially the first season, they were trying to appeal to non-boxing diehards. They were trying to appeal to a mass audience. They were trying to appeal to reality TV fans. So they added all these stupid challenges and all this cornball music and montages and all this shit that diehard fight fans don't give a damn about. They just want to see the fights, right? Now, in subsequent seasons of the Contender, they got a little bit more to just, the fights themselves. And what's unfortunate about that, it became more watchable for diehard fight fans, but it became less watchable for mainstream America, who just wants the idiocy of reality TV fed to them. They want the Kardashians and all that made-up fluff crap, right? Overly processed bullshit. That's what they want. So it went off the major networks, and I think last season it was on Epix or something, some fringe network. But, dude, it's a reality show in the end. Reality shows suck. They just do. I don't know how people watch that shit. Then he asked, Mickey Ward, Emmanuel Augustus, was that one of the greatest robberies in boxing history? So for those of you who don't know, Mickey Ward, Emmanuel Augustus, that was an outstanding fight. I think it won Fight of the Year. It was certainly a candidate. Thousands, maybe 2,000 plus punches thrown in that fight. It was great. It was ESPN, I want to say Friday Night Fights, but it was on ESPN. And most people thought it was a draw. Mickey Ward got the decision. So there was one judge, I made myself a note so I wouldn't forget this. There was one judge who scored at 96-94, which I agreed with. I thought Ward edged it. Some people out there thought a draw was just, but I thought 96-94 for Ward, not a bad score. A draw would have been totally fine with, but there were two judges who had it really wide for Mickey Ward, and those were really bad scorecards. But dude, that was not even close to one of the greatest robberies in the history of boxing. Not even close, which is unfortunate to say. But we've seen really shitty scorecards just this year that I think are probably worse than that. So it is what it is. Gonzalo Anaya asks, who would you favor in a fight between Rocky Marciano and Marac? Holy shit. Wow. That would be bombs away and a lot of fun. But I think that assuming The Rock could take Gassiev's power, which I actually think he'd get under, he had kind of a little bit of a Joe Frazier thing happening, right? He'd get under power and he'd swarm and just throw punches from crazy angles. He'd punch up, punch over, do what he had to do. I think that he'd touch up Gassiev to the body, take a lot of steam out of his punches, and slow him down. Gassiev would be punching down at him in a round. And I think that is assuming that Marciano could get under and inside the power that Gassiev had. Because Gassiev, one thing that got kind of exposed to a degree about him by Usyk is that he could be very one-dimensional. He just does one thing. And against most fighters, it works. But if you're an elite level mover, and I think Rocky had seriously underrated athleticism, I'd favor the Rock by decision in that fight. I really would. Some of you guys may disagree with that, but I just think he would. Even though Gassiev a lot bigger and naturally stronger. If Rocky Marciano fought today, man, you guys got to remember, he was like $175 or $190 or whatever at heavyweight. He could probably get down to $175. He'd be a light heavyweight right now. Could you imagine the power that guy had fighting at light heavyweight? Holy shit. Renee Salcido asks, what recent heavyweight fight ranks up there with Ron Lyle versus George Foreman? Their slugfest. So again, that fight's brought up. In terms of just back and forth action between two top 10 ranked heavyweights, Brewster Liakovic Brewster. That fight, if you guys haven't seen that, look it up and thank me later. Seydan Mooney asks, what's next for Jeff Horn? I don't know, dude. I have no idea. And then he asks, how widespread in boxing is performance-enhancing drug use? I don't think it's as widespread as some people think. I actually think, and I have good reason to think this, I've been told this by several state commission officials and testing doping authorities, not just folks at VADA, but folks at the actual laboratory that produced the tests. I've been told off record dude, I've spent hours on the phone talking to different people as research for stories and stuff that I've done. I'm by no means an expert on this subject, but I've talked to plenty of them. And I've been told that there's a much worse problem in MMA. That TJ Dillashaw guy, I don't really know much about him, but I know he's a popular MMA fighter. He just got busted. John Jones is a guy who's been busted 8,000 times and somehow continues to fight in MMA or be involved in UFC. There's a much, much worse problem in MMA because a lot of those fighters come from a wrestling background. And there is a huge, huge performance-enhancing drugs problem in wrestling. And I'm not talking about WWE and shit. Obviously, those guys are all juiced to the gills. I'm talking about high school, college wrestling. I just talked with a guy a couple weeks ago who won a state championship in high school and wrestled at a high level in college. And he just told me some of the tricks he would do of how he would beat weigh-ins and stuff right in front of commission people. Just, they'd be standing right there, and there were certain little tricks he did to beat weigh-ins and things like that to get down to unnatural weights. And he said it's just common practice, even at the high school level. There's massive performance-enhancing drug issues in that culture. And most MMA guys come from that wrestling background. That's really what MMA is. For the most part, it's wrestling. There are some instances of boxing and kickboxing, sure. But in the end, most of those fights end up on the ground and involve wrestling, right? So there is a much worse problem there. But back to boxing. It is used, of course, and I've sparred guys that I could tell were doing something because I could just, their stamina would change. It'd be completely different week to week. And their complexion and just things, their eyes, I would just see things and their legs would feel different. Just crazy, crazy difference. Most of the performance-enhancing drug issues in boxing are related to cutting weight. They're not related to bulking up and getting more muscle. They're related to cutting weight. And it's the same thing in MMA too. And a lot of it is outside of the USA, although I do think there's some guys in USA use. But it is an issue, but there are people out there who think half of the boxers are doing drugs. That's just statistically not true. It's not happening. It is a sizable minority of fighters. And some fighters at the top level, some fighters at the mid and lower levels as well are doing it. But, you know, that's why you guys got to rep VADA. I just, you know, they're not perfect, but I do think what they do is very, very good and necessary. Harrison Property asks, when are we going to hear tiny thuds against a miniature boxing bag? Oh, the question about kids. Dude, Tiff and I got to get this house together. We got to get all that squared away. We're moving in next month, but then there's still a bunch of work we got to do with that. And then we got to get married. So there's a couple steps, and that's even if we want to have kids. We're not 100% on that yet because this world is just getting crazier and crazier, and we're both not sure if we want to introduce children into this world. But we're pretty sure we might want to. So don't worry. I'll let you guys know. Silcon asks, tell us about your very first sparring session. Oh, man. Very first sparring session was against a guy who went on to have a very good amateur career as a heavyweight. Naturally a little bigger, definitely thicker and stronger than me, and actually played in the NFL briefly. I'm not going to say his name, but he actually ended up playing in the NFL. And he sparred with. He was a sparring partner for several pro boxers who ended up challenging for titles. Didn't win titles, but challenged for him. Specific one that stands out, I know he sparred with Latif Coyote at one point, was like a camp sparring partner. So they threw me in the ring with this dude, and you know, they didn't tell him it was my first sparring session, so he just beat the shit out of me. And it only went 3 rounds because at the end of the 3rd round, like they were like, okay, that's enough. But this dude just backed me up and beat the living shit out of me. And all I could really do was cover up. And I wasn't skilled enough at the time to understand distance and how to cover up. I was trying to just pick everything off like this. I was just trying to parry everything and slip. And he timed the shit out of me. And what I should have just did was, you know, shelled up. And I just didn't have the skill set to understand when to do that, when not to do that, when parrying is okay, when slipping is okay. You have to be at a certain range and angle and distance to do that, right? And I didn't know any of that. So this dude just beat the shit out of me for 3 rounds. That was my first sparring session. It was scary. I saw him as I went to sleep for the next few nights. I would close my eyes and go to bed at night, and I saw this dude just punching the shit out of me. It stayed in my mind for several days afterwards. But of course, I went back to the gym, and we got better. Scott X Scarier asked, what's your thoughts on Wilder's recent statement about getting back to basics? I talked about that earlier. Do you think his team are saying that now because the class is getting tougher, he can't just rely on that right hand so much? Maybe, but also I think he's heard some of the critics getting on him, and I think that he wants to show that he is a skilled fighter. So again, we'll see what he does against Brazil. Brad DW54 asks, will Mikey Garcia stay back at 140 or go back to 35? If he does, does he fight Loma? Kind of talked about this before. I think he's going to go to 40 and not fight Loma. And if he does, he'll talk about Loma, he'll mention him, but he'll say, you got to come up to 140 and fight on Showtime. Rojo Jr. asks, not a boxing question, but what do you think of the John Joy's steroid situation? Well, I just kind of talked about that. So some of these questions, I guess I should have put these in better order. I don't think the guy should be allowed to fight. He shouldn't be allowed to fight. From what I know, look, do I know everything on that situation? No. But based on what I do know, he shouldn't be fighting right now. Koran Bread asks, do you hang that drywall? Yes. Because I don't see even close to enough mud-covered screws. Admittedly, yes. I don't. You're supposed to put them every however many inches and all that. Dude, I don't have that much materials. I don't have that much money. So yeah, I don't. Yeah, he talks about that here. And you hang it sideways across the studs, staggered like bricks, not vertically. Yes, that's true. And that's how I do most of it. However, I had to work with an electrician because we had to redo a lot of the electrical work in the house because it was so bad because it's such an old house. He had to rewire stuff. And he could only get in once every couple of weeks to do a portion of the house at a time. And I didn't want to sit and wait months for him to be done before I did the drywall. So there'd be a particular section of wall done, and there'd only be enough room to get one vertical sheet in there. So I said, screw it, and I put it in that way. Now, is that the best way to do it? No. Looking back, I should have spaced things out better and just waited for this electrician to get the whole house done and then just did the whole drywall at one time. But like I said, I was working around him for weeks and months, and I would just kind of drywall the areas that I could. And it's been a learning process for me, bro. Cien asks, who is my favorite boxer of all time? Man, it's hard to pick just one. But just off, I mentioned Arturo Gatti earlier. Just bang for your buck, entertainment-wise, Arturo Gatti. He really gave it his all. He left everything in that ring. And what got you into boxing? I would just say my family got me into boxing. But I mentioned before how I briefly got into basketball a little bit when the Pistons were going good. What brought me back to boxing in a big way is the fact that, yes, is there politics? Absolutely. Is there fuckery? Is there bad judging? Yes, all of that exists. But in the end, that exists in every single sport. It really, really does. If you guys don't think that shit happens in the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball, it is in every sport. The difference with boxing is these. In the end, you have a chance to change your life and redo. Look at Andrew Cancio earlier this year, right? Cancio. He was supposed to lose that fight against Machado. He was the opponent. Changed his life, his kid's life, probably his grandkid's life with these two things right here, his left and his right fist. You have that chance to upset the system, to change everything, even if you're going to get robbed. The sanctioning organization is going to screw you. The promoter is going to screw you. The network's going to screw you. You can screw all of them and upset their plan with a good left or a good right. There is no other sport. There is no other part of our society where that exists. That's why boxing's awesome. Think about it. I mean, look at our political system. Can you score a knockout and upset everybody in our political system? It's all about money. It's all about money and influence. You know what I'm saying? Boxing has that. Okay. Almost done, guys. About 5 more. John Gary Navita asks, do you think Ricardo Finito Lopez is underrated as a fighter by fans because he fought at the lighter weights? Yes. Smaller fighters, particularly before the 2000s, were criminally underrated, especially in the United States where we are obsessed with size. The bigger, the better, right? That's why middle America loves the NFL, loves the NBA, because those guys are so big. They don't appreciate smaller athletes as much here in this part of the world. They do more in Latin America, Europe, obviously in Asia, but here in the United States, not as much. He also asked, how good was Duran, Roberto Duran, at 135 for you? And he mentions some of the other greats at 135. Gans, Canzaneri, who I talked about earlier, Whitaker, Ortiz, De Jesus prior. Duran is probably the best lightweight ever. Probably. I think that it is hard to make a case that there was another fighter that was as vicious as him at 135. Vicious, but also skilled. I just, there are other guys that I'd put up there next to him. Gans up there, Canzaneri up there. Probably that's the top three, right? But there have been so many great lightweights, but Duran probably the best, man. Hashtag Joshua Wilder asks, let's say you fight an elite level boxer. Me fight an elite level boxer, who do you think I could beat? Nobody. We talk about a pro boxer? Nobody, bro. These guys are professionals. How much of a weight advantage? Oh, I think I get your question now. He's asking how much of a weight advantage would be required. So I think you're asking, could I beat Rungvisai? I guess in theory, if I could connect with a big right hand, maybe I could knock out Rungvisai if I could catch him slipping. But probably what would happen is he'd slip every shot because he'd see it coming, and he'd beat the shit out of me to the body. But assuming I could take Rungvisai's body shots or Inoue's body shots, and I could avoid them, hitting me directly to the chin, which I probably could because I'd see everything coming up at me. Maybe I could get in a big right hand and hurt them. Maybe if I win the lottery, but probably not. There's probably minimum weights that would knock me out. Dude, there are levels to this game, guys. Just because I spar and train don't mean shit. There's a lot of internet tough guys that think they are the shit. But if I've been humbled in sparring sessions, I told you guys, but dudes who were like semi-pro, ended up going pro and having losing records. I've been humbled. There's levels to this game, guys. B. Zanin asks, I just watched James Toney versus Mike McCallum 1 and 2, and I was telling myself, those guys are a zillion times more gifted technically than any modern day champions. No disrespect, but I disagree. I think that gifted, maybe, right? But come on, man. Alexander Usyk, Vasily Lomachenko, Terrence Crawford, these guys are pretty damn gifted. Canelo Alvarez is criminally underrated with some of his skill set, with a lot of the Canelo haters. So, yes, Toney, McCallum, very skilled fighters, very good. I do think some people overrate Toney to a degree. At his best, he was damn good. But a zillion times more gifted, technically? Dude, watch Alexander Usyk fight. Come on. Do you think James Toney would beat Alexander Usyk at cruiserweight? I don't. I think Usyk would beat the shit out of him. Not knock him out or dominate, but he'd win. Shouldn't say beat the shit. Let me rephrase that. He'd win a decision. And it would be 8-4, somewhere in that range. Sabi MD asks, well, 3 questions, bro. I'm going to give you 3. I never get tired of the story of how you got Tiff into boxing. Too late to not enough time to describe that right now for those of you who don't know. But if you follow me and you're watching this, you probably know that story. Is there anything she's gotten me into or tried to? You know what? She has got me into Vietnamese food. A lot of Americans, when they think Asian food, they think of Chinese, Japanese, Thai, right? Pho, which is the Vietnamese soup, that's becoming pretty mainstream now and popular. But there's a bunch of other Vietnamese dishes that Tiffany has gotten me into that are really good. And I didn't realize how much better Vietnamese food is than most Chinese food. Chinese food sucks. Dim sum sucks compared to most Vietnamese food. Seriously. My favorite Asian foods now are Vietnamese and Thai. So Tiffany is technically Chinese and Vietnamese. That is her mix. But her family emigrated to America from Vietnam. So somebody from China ended up going to Vietnam at some point and hooking up with a Vietnamese person, and that's Tiffany's line. But her family immigrated here from Vietnam, so they carry a lot of the Vietnamese traditions with them. And man, some of that food, really, really fresh, really, really good. And Tiffany 100% got me into that. He also asked, did you ever meet Burt Randolph Sugar? No, I did not, unfortunately. Did not meet him. And he asked, would Martinez Coto have played out differently without the hurt knee? Where did the injury come from? Because it didn't seem Martinez was hurt in prior fights. He had been hurt in prior fights. Watch his fight, I believe, with Martin Murray. Clearly hurt it in that fight. The knee had been a problem for a while. There was a documentary, I believe it was called Maravilla, which was his nickname. Find it on Netflix, the documentary. I think it's called Maravilla, which kind of goes into his life and the injury. It talks about a lot of that stuff going on behind the scenes. He was really beat up the last few years of his career. My personal hunch, I have no basis to prove this, but knowing what I know about Freddie Roach, who's able to get info on people and stuff, my personal belief is that somebody in Coto's camp got wind of what was going on with Sergio Martinez behind the scenes, knew how broken and beat up he was, and said, we're going that way. We're going to challenge this dude, and we're going to take that middleweight title. Because when that fight was made, a lot of people thought Coto was crazy. They thought he was nuts. But they kind of knew, I personally believe, behind the scenes, the injury stuff going on, and knew that he was ripe for the picking. And I always say, had Floyd Mayweather moved up and challenged Martinez the way Coto did, his legacy would be so much better than it is right now, because that is the type of challenge that Floyd just didn't take. And Coto, yeah, he lost a lot of fights, but he took certain challenges other guys wouldn't. And that Martinez fight ended up being a big, big win for him. Had Martinez not been hurt, had it been the prime version of Sergio Martinez that we saw beat Paul Williams, Kelly Pavlik, I think he would have beat Coto up. Just would have been too big and too fast, too athletic, too skilled. I think he would have beat Coto. Okay, asks, how would I assess DAZN so far? So far, dude, it's okay. Not great, not bad. It's okay. It's pretty good. There are things they can learn. There are things they could do better. I could do an hour-long video on that. It's okay. It's also not even a year old. People need to pump the brakes, give them a chance. And he also asked, how would I assess the future of British boxing with so many UK fighters fighting in the US? Very, very bright. Some of the best prospects in all of boxing right now are in the UK. You guys have a very, very healthy scene. Guys like Josh Kelly, Danny Dubois, there's a million of them I could name. More and more British fighters, I think, will come to the UK. I think someone like Tyson Fury is going to open doors. I think Anthony Joshua coming here is going to open doors. And we're going to see a lot more British fighters coming over here. And look, the guys doing it right now, there were doors opened for them by fighters like Lennox Lewis, by Joe Calzaghe, right? The generation before always paves the way for the new generation. But because of the demographics of boxing and because the UK fight scene is so hot and the fan scene is so hot, they'll come over here and get paid and stuff, but you're going to see more and more of our fighters here in America have to go over there. There's going to be more situations where they have to go over there to get the big paydays. But yeah, very bright, dude. UK fight scene is in good shape. Okay, last question by Jay Ibarra. He asks, now that Canelo and Gennady are getting up there in age, which Mexican/Russian general area fighters should we be watching or paying attention to? Dude, there's a million. Okay? But just off the top of my head, Ryan Garcia, he's not he's American, but his heritage is Mexican. He's a lightweight. Virgil Ortiz, he might be the best American prospect in boxing right now out of Dallas, 140-pounder. He's of Mexican heritage. Gabriel Flores Jr. is a lightweight. Keep an eye on him. Alexander Besputin, welterweight. Maxim Dadashev, I talked about earlier, 140-pounder. Sergey Bohachuk, 154-pounder. There are a million of them that I could name, seriously. So those parts of the world are going to continue to give to boxing. So that's it, guys. Ask Me Anything for April 2019 is finished. We will do another one of these in a couple months, in a few months. The next time I do one of these, I'll be doing it from my brand new studio in my completed house. All right, guys, I'll see you at the fights. Lots of action this weekend. It's going to be fun.